Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the tumultuous times following World War One and looking at the different forms of government that were being considered. Now, we need to understand sort of those times. The world, other than sort of lesser regional conflicts, the world really hadn't had a major war since the Napoleonic Wars of 1815. Sure, there had been wars. There's the Franco-Prussian War, there was the Russian-Japanese War, and there were other conflicts, and also civil wars. For example, there was there's a more or less a civil war, I guess, in Germany there, leading up to unification, or amongst the German states rather. There was a civil war of sorts in Italy, again leading to unification. I think it was in the late 1860s. So there were conflicts, but nothing along the scale of the Napoleonic Wars and some of the convulsions that have taken place previously. So the world had been at peace for or relative peace, at least for nearly 100 years. So when the First World War came, it was a huge convulsion, the likes of which hadn't been seen for a long, long time, if ever, really, given the scale of it. So there was a view, certainly at the end of the war, where people were asking, well, why did so many young men lay down their lives? For what? What was it all about? There were some mega corporations that made insane profits out of the war. Some people became very, very rich, um, not from necessarily doing productive things, but being involved in supplying various support services or armaments to the war machine. So people came away from the war feeling that it was just an exercise in futility, mass slaughter on a hitherto unseen scale, but also the elite and the rich class, if you like, profiteering from it. Now, when the war ended, there were a lot of people with a lot of injuries. They'd lost legs and arms and had the most terrible injuries. And there was very little support for those people, certainly a lot less than we would consider today. And even today, we've got the same problem with military veterans who've served. If they've suffered any sort of injury or anything like that, they're being treated, some would say, rather badly. But back then it was different, and even the medical care they were being given was within a year or two of the war ending was being withdrawn, and from people that needed ongoing medical care. So it was, this didn't go down very well, and people thought, well, yeah, is the capitalist system, the globalist sort of capitalist system that was at play then, is that really working in the interests of the populace when so many millions have laid their lives down in defence of their nation, and now they're being cast aside by the callous, uncaring political class. So that was part of the concern at the time. Now, the 1920s was a boom time, recovering from the war and so on, and it was the beginning of what today we would view as the consumer age. So there was plenty of work and plenty of money sloshing around, a lot of it debt fueled, but nonetheless, and it was called the Roaring Twenties, and people were a lot of people did okay out of that. And that sort of covered up, I guess, in a lot of ways, the problems that to do with welfare and care of the populace, care of ex-servicemen. Because remember, gazillions of people had been mobilised. It wasn't like it affected a few people here and there. There wasn't a family in Europe that hadn't been touched by this, hadn't lost a relative or a next door neighbour or both, and so on. So. Now, when the Great Depression hit in 1929, the Roaring Twenties went off the boil, and unemployment was fairly high. There was a huge workforce in casual labourers, just labourers, labourers on a building site, farm hands. It didn't matter, and everyone was kind of doing okay. But when the Great Depression came, this unskilled, just general labourers that were doing quite well, they all lost their, well, not all, but many of them lost their jobs. So unemployment went from, almost nothing to 25% within a fairly short space of time. Now you've got a lot of unskilled, um, mainly men sort of roaming around here, and they, um, in the United States, they would travel all over the place, and even in places like Australia, I remember as a kid talking to farmers who were around in the 1920s and 1930s, and they said that people would come along and say, look, I don't want wages, just give me somewhere to sleep and let me have something to eat. So for half a loaf of bread and an egg and a pint of milk a day, you could get someone to work all day on your farm. It was, your labour costs sort of went to close to zero. So the farmers used to, would say. So anyway, there was a view that the capitalism and the profit motive and the sort of elite class running things while they all swanned around in tails and top hats while people were starving in the street, and that was viewed as being an unacceptable way to administer government and run a society. And people were looking at what will be the alternatives. What else is there out there? Do we need new ideas? Do we need different forms of government, different types of government? Can we fine tune the existing sort of government we've got, and so on? So these were the discussions of the time. Now, socialism had been a sort of an intellectual talking point from the 1890s. Now, the general idea of socialism was, why don't we just share everything and everyone has an equal amount? Now, the view was somehow, and this is where it fell apart. The view was that a capitalist economy produces, for example, I'm simplifying this, a capitalist economy produces 100 widgets a year, for example. But 80 of those widgets go to 10% of the population, and the other 20 widgets go to the 80% of the population. That's not fair. Why don't we create a fairer society and a fairer economy? Okay, fine. I mean, no one's got a problem with that. Who's against things being fair? I don't think anyone would be against that, or very few. So the idea was that the socialists had was that if they had an equal distribution of widgets to the entire population, that that it would be, if everyone got an equal amount, that the economy would still produce 100 widgets. So you would still have the same amount to distribute around, provided it was done, equally, and then that would be a fair and reasonable society. And I guess on the face of it, that's not too bad. Now you've got man's natural corruption, so you've got party officials and ideological hacks and goons and parasites are always going to try and get a little bit more for them and their relatives and friends and so on. But this idea was an economy will still produce 100 widgets, and therefore we can distribute that. But a socialist economy doesn't produce the 100. The capitalist economy produced the 100 widgets, but the socialist economy will only produce 65 widgets. Because there's nothing in it for anybody anymore. No one's going to derive any particular benefit. Why should this guy work hard? Why should that guy employ his brain power on producing more things or inventing a new machine or something like that? Why should anyone go out of their way when they're not really going to benefit? Now, you may decide, well, what's wrong with working hard to help your neighbour? And sure, that's right, but when I look across I'm on the factory production line, I look over to the other production line, I see all a bunch of slackers going as slow as they can. And I'm thinking to myself, why should I work hard just because I'm still only going to get allocated one widget a year? Why should I work hard when these guys are also get one widget a year, even though I'm working twice as hard, or working twice as many hours or whatever? But why should I give more and work harder and inconvenience myself for the benefit of someone who isn't prepared to to pull their weight in the same way. Now, in a capitalist economy, other things being equal, if somebody works harder, then they're gonna get more, get rewarded more, and someone works less. Again, it's not perfect, but someone works less, then they're not going to make as much. So this is a very important sort of aspect of, and where the socialists didn't quite get it. This blithe assumption that the socialist economy will still produce as much as the capitalist economy. Now, there's also a second tier of, in the capitalist economy, if you produce a shoddy widget, people won't buy it, and they'll buy something else. But in a socialist economy, they only get one widget. They don't have a choice. So if it's that low quality, if the widget is as low quality manufacture, nothing that the consumers can do. They've got to get it. So they tolerate rather than choose what they're going to do. And this is also a big difference in terms of incentive and motivation and the like. Now, the communists in the Soviet Union tried to address this by paying people bonuses. So if you worked harder at stoking the boiler in the in the factory, then they would pay you bonuses. But then the shops that you could go to spend that money had very restricted product lines and very restricted. You're effectively on a ration, so your rations were really going to be the same as the other guy. That regardless of how much money you had, the same as the other guy. Now you could go onto the black market if you like and engage in bribery and corruption, but you had to kind of be pretty careful. And so the reality was that even though you may have more money, there was nothing you could buy in a restricted socialist economy where everything's centrally allocated. So the socialists sort of didn't quite think that through. I mean, Karl Marx in the Das Kapital, he'd actually done, I think anyway, a lot of heavy lifting in terms of determining surplus value and its origins, but he missed some critical points. The motivation. Why should I work hard so that guy who does nothing will get the same amount as me? And that's the question that comes into, where's the motivation, where's the incentive in a socialist economy? In fact, there isn't. You can look at ideological incentive where I want to be a party hack and a goon, and they'll give you a better apartment and you'll access to better shops and access to better vacation houses, and you can get that. But then you have to be ideological. So it's still not hard work. You're just sucking up to the people in the power structure above you to get that benefit. You're not doing something of benefit for the people, or to improve the lives of everybody, or no more than someone else could have done. So anyway, that's one of the failures of the rationale and the intellectual discipline of socialism. But it was considered to be certainly an option. And when the Bolsheviks seized government, a political party called the Bolsheviks seized government in Russia in 1917. They had a pretty good sort of public relations PR machine, and that skited about the benefits of it. And they were saying, well, look, we don't have unemployment when the Great Depression. We don't have any of these booms and busts and that sort of thing because we're socialists and we share everything. Now that wasn't really the reality, and they had to kill millions upon millions of people for being ideologically impure, as every socialist economy must do. That because to make it work as they would see it, the ideological fanatics see it, everybody has to think the same way. You cannot have a single errant view. And if you err on this, if you don't have that same ideological view, they'll declare you as mentally incompetent and give you a lobotomy or something, or they'll put you in prison, or they'll kill you. And in the case of the Soviet Union, they killed people, as indeed did Mao's communists in China, killed tens of millions of people just for ideological wrongthink. Because if you're not thinking the right way, you could be subverting or holding back the glory of the revolution, slowing us down and reaching this paradise on earth. So we're going to have to kill you, buddy. And that's pretty much their attitude. Whereas in capitalism, you get a choice. If you don't want to work, well, it's up to you. But in communism, you have wrongthink, they'll kill you. And as they did in Pol Pot's regime in Cambodia and so on. Now, socialism in terms of democratic socialism, where there's still quite a bit of capitalism, but there's a welfare state, that's been tried. And that came pretty much after World War II, starting, in the late 1940s. But prior to that, probably the only state that was really trying it would have been Federated Germany. They had quite a good welfare state there, but they married it very well and very effectively with the capitalist system and the profit motive and so on. And the Germans were producing some of the best engineers in the world, certainly in quantity, the best engineers in the world, from the 1870s onwards, and even into the fascist era in World War II. Some of the really great developments in rocket technology, infrared technology, and metallurgy and so on were coming out of Germany at the time. Now, this view of needing another form of government, and well, capitalism's failed. The World War II, the World War One, and the Great Depression have proved that capitalism has failed. Look at what's happening. What else can we do? So socialism was one. Now, socialism, is really a mix of capitalism, wealth producing, and socialist redistribution, running side by side. Socialism tends to be democratically arrived. Now, communism is really a revolutionary element of socialism, where the masses just don't understand what they need, and an elite imposes it through revolution at the point of a gun, imposes communism, which is no private enterprise at all, or a tiny proportion of private enterprise. The rest is all state-owned, state-controlled, centrally allocated. Socialists tend to have a more responsive system to the capitalist market, but again, that they more do the redistribution side of things as opposed to the state ownership of production. Now, the communists, apart from the point of the gun, have a complete state ownership. So the government in the Soviet Union, for example, the communist government, they call themselves socialists, but the reality was that the form of socialism they practiced was quite radical, and the state owned everything. There was maybe 3 or 4% of the agricultural sector was in private hands, especially for things like growing herbs like garlic and parsley, those sorts of things, where they just weren't suitable in any way for mass collective farming. They were still in private hands, but it's a very tiny proportion of the total economy. Now, the state owned everything. The state allocated everything, centrally planned everything, and instead of companies buying things, as in you need new I don't know, you need new lathes, for your factory. But instead of buying those lathes, companies would give each other credits based on the notional value. So if you bought a lathe and you were going to produce widget X, you would then trade those widget X for something else, and then you would pay back the factory that made the lathes. So there's a way of instead of using money, they used credits back and forth between companies. Company needed coal, they would be given a credit for coal, or there'd be a notional centrally planned value saying, well, that load of coal is equal to 3 lathes, or 5 trucks, or whatever it may be. So that was the transaction. The Nazis actually did something similar in Germany for a while. In getting the economy kick-started in the early days. They were far more effective at it than the Russians or the Soviet Union were. The Germans or the fascists really made it work quite well and did very well out of it. They turned Germany in 1933, dirt pouring on its ass. By 1939, the Germans had the highest standard of living in Europe, 6 years. And so they did very well with it. The Soviets, by contrast, even though the intention was there and they were trying, they fucked it up quite badly. Okay, so there was communism, socialism, and a lot of people were looking at communism and saying, the socialism, and saying, well, this is obviously the way to go. We share everything. No one goes without, no one goes hungry, no one goes without shelter. and that's the way to go. But they failed, ideologically, sure, but in practical terms, no one has ever made that work. The more communist element in particular. And the trouble with having a revolution, communist revolution, the point of a gun is it's very difficult to bring the people with you. This is how popular communism was. The Russians and the Chinese had to make it illegal for anyone to leave the country. North Koreans do it today. It had to be illegal for anyone to leave the country. So if you want to leave the system, they'll kill you for it, or won't let you leave. They'll probably put you in prison or kill you. Now, if it's such a good system, if such a paradise on earth, nobody would want to leave. But in fact, so many people wanted to leave that they stopped it. Same in East Germany after World War II. Anyone that was able to would leave to go to West Germany, and particularly as the West German economy really started to kick on, in the mid to late 50s, it was really, really turning into a powerhouse economy. Even then, and so East Germans were wanting, well, gee, I'll go to West Germany. Why would I? Because it's all divided after the war into occupation zones, and East Germany was occupied by the Soviets. So people would leave. So the East German government actually had to stop people from leaving. Now, if it was such a fantastic place and a great system, nobody would want to leave. It'd be the other way. People from the West would be coming east, but it wasn't that. Anyone that could get up and walk was leaving East Germany, and so they had to, at the point of a gun, stop people from leaving. And if people did try to leave, they shot them, for goodness sakes. So now fascism was, if you look at sort of fascism, and it took in various forms. Some of the Italian fascism and the German fascism were quite different. I mean, they had some similarities, but and Mussolini brought fascism into Italy in 1922. This was well before the Great Depression started. Now, Mussolini, who'd previously been a journalist, by the way, Mussolini viewed that if they didn't do something and create a sort of a new form of government, that socialism or communism would take over. So Mussolini really said, well, let's keep some of the socialism elements of what the communists and socialists wanted to do, but let's keep the private enterprise side of it, and the two can sort of run together. Now, one of the things that scared the Italians in particular with the communists, they wanted to get rid of all religion, and the popes in Rome and all this sort of thing. So that didn't really work, and it went down like a lead balloon with a lot of Italians. So Mussolini responded to the times. I mean, I'm simplifying it here. There are more issues than this, but responded to the times and produced this hybrid of a socialist sort of welfare state of sorts with a capitalist thing running in parallel. And Mussolini did quite well. I mean, compared to what Italy had been like beforehand and some of the other places in Europe, Italy was actually quite prosperous in the 1920s, far more so than many other places around Europe. They were doing quite well. Now, in Germany, there'd been an endless number of attempts by communist revolutionaries. Most famous being in 1919, the Spartacist Revolution, led by a Jewish lesbian school teacher, Rosa Luxemburg, and her Confederate Karl Liebknecht. So there'd been numerous attempts at that, and the Nazis, the fascists, the National Socialist Workers' Party, were really the ones to fill that vacuum and say, or that void, say, okay, well, capitalism's failed, the corporate elite, the way they ran World War One, that's failed. So what we need is something different. And Hitler was absolutely adamant that the only way that his party should come to power was through the ballot box. The communists and the socialists, especially the radical socialists, they wanted to do it at the point of a gun. Hitler said, no, we have to bring the people with us. We have to bring the people with us, and we have to win through the ballot box, which ultimately they did. So this is an important element as well. The fascists believe, as Mussolini did, fascists believe we have to bring the people with us. We have to get the people on side. The communists and the socialists never achieved that, never, and didn't give a shit about it. Anyone disagrees with us, we'll kill them. The Nazis were quite different. The fascists were quite different, Italy and in Germany. Now, if you were, Jewish or homosexual activist, or you were a radical school teacher, or a gypsy, or that sort of thing, you didn't do too good. But that was only 1% of the population. So there was only 400,000, I think, Jews in the entire Germany, of a population of more than 70 million, and more than half of those were invited to leave Germany and were assisted, very, very, a lot of resources put at the disposal of Jews to leave Germany. A lot of them did, going to the United States and so on, and approximately 200,000 remained, but and it didn't work out too well, as we know. So, but the fascists in Germany, in particular, they wanted to bring the people with them and wanted the people to embrace the new government. And this is the critical difference between the communists, the radical socialists, and the fascists. The fascists wanted to gain popular support and achieved it. Mussolini was very popular in the day, as indeed was Hitler. So now the fascists in Germany created this hybrid where there's a lot of welfare and a lot of uh, government organisations, if you will, to encourage civic participation at various levels, whether it be helping out on farms or helping out on beautifying the parks, the local areas, these sorts of things, and that worked very well. Again, the Germans had the highest standard of living in Europe in 1939, so there's no question that it worked well. But that was the fascist model. Now, one of the things that scares the the elites in any environment today, no less than it did then, is that fascism um, is done with the support of the people. It is popular. The people support it. The communist revolutions, on the other hand, people don't support it. And if you look at today, the elites all the way across the Western world, the globalist cabal, they only attack what they see as popular government that the people embrace and support. They particularly attack that. They're not concerned about the communists and the revolution and the if you like, the new form of government imposed from above, which is what the globalists are doing. But they do fear the people embracing a different form of government, which is why they were so calling Trump a fascist and all this sort of thing, or Marine Le Pen in France. Marine Le Pen and even Trump, to a large extent, they really had quite a few sort of what you'd call soft socialist views in terms of looking after the people. So they were nowhere near were they far right, or nowhere near far right. But that's the tag that the scared globalist cabal have given them. But these were the times, the 1920s and 30s. These were the times where it was viewed a different form of government was needed, different ways of running society were needed, and those were those expressions. They were unique to those times, but the questions that they posed haven't been answered even today, and we've got the globalists forcing a new type of society on us without our consent. You've been with Tacitus today at your pushback channel, and thank you for listening.